Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the podcast today, we have Charles Collins. Welcome, Charles.
Thank you, Thomas. Nice to be here.
My pleasure. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. Well, as Thomas mentioned, my name, so we'll go beyond that to the next level, which has to do with what I'm doing and about myself. So I'm now in what you will learn after this interview is over, in the fourth stage of my life as a craftsman. And that is the mentorship phase of life. So that's age 65 and beyond, but that's all you're getting out of me. And that basically means that there are things that I am now dedicated to that I didn't have the time to do when raising a young family and doing all those other things on our way up to this final and pretty amazing phase of life. So at this time, I'm now engaged in the practices of taking my work that I've done throughout my lifetime and packaging it in a manner by which my future generations of my family can find it and easily use it in their own lives. And then, as you will also find out through this interview, that in the way of craftsmanship, one then releases that work to the world in a manner by which people can find it. And if they find it useful, the work speaks for itself and they can take it up and use it in their own lives. So part of that would be engaging with folks like yourself in podcasts and in other ways of distributing the content such that people can find it and use it and hopefully improve their own lives and their own work.
Okay, well, I was going to ask you about the four phases of life as a craft.
Yes, exactly.
So, but you did say something which made me think about it. When you first started talking about this, was it specifically for family members and then sort of went out, you thought it would be applicable for everyone else? Because that's often how these things start.
You're absolutely right. And I'm in the often category. So that's exactly how it started with us.
So can you tell me a bit about the four phases of life as a craft?
So using a backdrop for your audience, when they listen to this, I'll ask, every one of you who's listening to go back into your own life and perhaps look at an area or a topic, a subject, something that you may have formally gone into training and learning about. Whether it's your school years at university or whether it's a particular occupation, it could be doctor, lawyer, candlestick maker, it really doesn't matter. But if you look at these structured crafts or trades or occupations that we learn throughout life, they usually come in a series of very distinct phases. You start with the earlier phases and then you move through the more progressive phases as you learn and increase your knowledge and your skills and your capabilities. Yeah. So with that framework in mind, which almost everyone on the planet can relate to because you've done one thing or another in that same way, let's take a look at this thing called life as a whole, right? We spend somewhere between 60 to 80 years on the planet. And we engage in all these various trades and occupations, most of which are structured in terms of learning and progressive increase in the more advanced stages. But when it comes to looking at life, the big picture in the same way, you almost don't find it applicable anywhere. The big picture things of life end up coming at you just as kind of these random things coming over the fence and through the trees and all the rest of that. And we're not really taught to look at the continuum of our lives as a kind of a progressive structure, the same way we look at our trades and our crafts. So in the formation of this approach to how do I look and how do I manage this big thing called life, we understood that our trades and our crafts take us through four very distinct phases, no matter what it is that you're going to learn. And those phases are phase one, apprenticeship, the learning phase. And this is where we formally enter into, for the first time, being exposed to whatever that trade occupation or trade craft is. The second phase that you transition off into is called journey work. And journey work, as its name implies, is about journeying, but it also is from the French word jour, which is the day's work, yes? And so when you enter into the journey work phase of any trade or craft, you're now going about the day's work, the drudgery and moving through and trying to get there. The third phase in any trade is that once you've distinguished yourself as a trade or a craftsperson, again, professions are also included in that word craft. You now enter into a phase called mastery. And this is when you present a work to a collective who determines that your work meets the quality standards of that particular collective, also known as guilds or associations or societies. And you now move into the mastery phase. That's the third component of the work. And finally, after mastery is completed, you're now moving into the fourth phase, and that is called mentorship. And it has a very distinct component. So each of these phases, if we were to now step back and say, well, fine, those are the four phases of most of our trades, occupations, and professions. How could we look at our life that way? And this concept of life as a craft basically says, when you're a child, up until about age 12 or 14, you're raised as a child, primarily by parents or caregivers, right? And at approximately that 12 or 14 years old, in most cultures across the world, you pass through a rite of passage. And this is the time when you step over into the world of the adults. And you now are progressively taught to start thinking and understanding that you will become the craftsperson of your own life someday. And you're now moving toward that skill building and knowledge to become an independent standalone. So the first phase of life as a craft is between roughly 12 years old and roughly your early 20s. And when you complete that apprenticeship work, which means to learn, you now move across from the 20s and enter the second phase called the journey work. This is when you go out into the world and you're going with hammer and tong and you're going to try to make your way in the world over the next roughly 20 years or so. And that takes you through roughly the age 25 to 45 is your journey work phase. As you now move into your third phase and you've distinguished yourself as a, quote, tradesman, craftsman, professional, whatever, you move into mastery. And this is where you'll now get into making your master plans and your masterpieces. And that's roughly age 45 to 65. And then finally, as you move across that final bridge, that final phase, 65 to 85 and beyond, we now move into the world of mentorship. And that has its own, as I, in our opening, told you the things that I'm doing in the mentorship phase. So what it basically says is we can teach and we can think about and talk to one another about the idea that our life is not useful after our work is done at the factory or at the office. And then you now fall into just basically dying for the next 20 years. In fact, it says your life is full of purpose over 4 phases. And that final fourth phase has a great deal of things to do. And it doesn't mean sitting around and just waiting for the Grim Reaper.
Well, that would be mentoring, presumably, in the applying that to life, right? So once you're in phase 4, you'd be essentially a mentor.
Yes. And so let's just chat about that for a moment, because we know that, the concept of mentor, it means in rough terms, a trusted advisor. And that mentor is not only someone who has skills, but is also someone who is going to not take advantage of someone who needs the mentoring because they're in a position of not understanding something and that they're going to be taken advantage of. So mentor is a very important role, and teachers most oftentimes are mentors. Yes. Now we do that for one another throughout our lives from time to time with friends, family, and whatever the case may be. But mentorship as a phase, the final fourth phase in life as a craft, if you're practicing it that way, goes beyond that functional role and becomes an entire phase or a state in which the ultimate goal of the phase over that final 20-year period or so is to gather up from your master's journal and your journey work journals and the artifacts or work product of life that you've developed, and to determine which shall you put into your, in America, they have these presidential museums, after the president has come in, they create this museum in which they put artifacts, so to speak, for the future generations. Your mentorship phase is all around building that collection, choosing things that are of high quality that you can leave to the next generation as part of their heritage. And that primarily starts with those coming through your family, but in a way that the outer world can also experience it for those who are interested.
And do you tend to find lots of, or what better question, what percentage of people would you say take on that mentoring role that you've come across who are in phase 4?
I haven't come across, and therein lies the modern day difficulty with a modern culture. The modern culture, by and large, moves them out to pasture. The modern culture, by and large, sends them messages that this is time for you to rest and relax, as if you were a cog in the wheels of a factory somewhere, and now you've done your time in jail, so to speak. Now, go out to pasture and so forth. This is not at all the message that has been sent or exists in traditional cultures.
So we've made it socially normal for that to be the practice, even though there's an awful lot of value that can be passed down to us from mentors, essentially.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. In many cultures, what happens at mentorship phase is also another rite of passage. Just like the apprenticeship phase, they enter the phase of elder, and they move into this eldership phase in their lives, whereby the elders of the village, the elders of the tribe, the elders of the family have and must accept the responsibility that they now have a duty to help to balance and act as a balancing influence. And they're trained to do this, such that when they enter this phase in their lives, it's not that they're being put out to pasture or they're useless. They now have a very important role to fill for the rest of their lives, which has meaning and purpose. So it's alive and well through human history, and we know it and we understand it. It's a question of, do we practice it?
Mm. Do you find, because I was thinking about mastery is number 3, right?
It is.
I presumably that's that example which isn't practiced as much as it should be, but there are also probably phases which are still practiced. Would you say that phase 3 is one of those?
I do. I would say that we keenly understand, even in a modern society, we keenly understand the first 3 phases: apprenticeship, journey work, and mastery. And we practice them in our trades, occupations, and professions. There's no question we do that. There's no question that it is a common term and or ideas that are used. Journey work, perhaps not, but the others, apprentice and mastery, are used all the time in the world of personal development and so forth and so on. We hear this in our trades and professions. But so I would say that those are not dead. They're understood, and somebody can probably put their finger on that somewhere in their lives and say, yeah, that's a familiar idea. That's a familiar concept. But looking at it as part of the continuum of your own life as the ultimate masterpiece that you're creating, most people won't take that next level or that next step, which is now what my job is now, to put that out into the public domain and allow those who want to look at things that way to take it up.
Is that what your books are an aim to do? So I had a look, and it's making a masterpiece of your life and the way of craftsmanship. That's you going for mentoring. Is that right?
Yes, I would say. Well, so it's funny. So back to your earlier point that did this start as something for the family and then kind of grow out? And yes, that's how it happened. So that first book, Making a Masterpiece of Your Life, actually was a dare. I never planned. I never planned on putting that out in that regard. That is the result of a piece of work that was done and was used internally within the family. And it's a reference book or a handbook. And it's based on the model that's used in craftsmen's workshops around the world, whereby the master of the workshop would place a handbook, or what's called the workshop journal, at the center of the workshop, and it would be open. And the craftsmen and women in that workshop, whatever the trade might be, would make not personal observations, but would make specific observations about the work and the knowledge that was being conducted in the workshop as a sharing component, as a tool to all the other craftspeople in the workshop. And so and today you'll find that in offices, and they'll call it the company handbook or something like that. So, I mean, it continues. Well, in thinking about life as a craft, and that your home is effectively a micro workshop where mom and dad, or parents, however that may be, are the other masters of that workshop, and they're raising young apprentices and craftspeople in that workshop. We took the idea that, well, why not have our own kind of handbook for the workshop for the family? And so that's how that started. So if you were to look at it and try to read it, you would say, well, this isn't a book as a novel or something of that. And we state that right up front. We say, no, this is a handbook that takes the 5 components of life as a craft and gives you a way to go in and look at them and say, I'm interested in this. Let's talk about it. Yeah. So that's how that came. And then I got a dare by somebody 10 years after I wrote it that said, you should put this as a book on Amazon. I said, I have no idea how to do that. And so they shouldn't have said that because I went and did it. So yeah, that's that one.
And The Way of Craftsmanship?
So fundamentally, when going underneath and starting to look at life as a craft, and there's an article on the Life Masterpiece Journal, which is the latest version of how I'm putting the content out into the world. The process of going through and saying, well, wait a minute, if life is a craft, how is it structured, and what are the topics that one learns in this trade, in this craft? And as I started going deeper and deeper and deeper into all of these different versions of trades and occupations, what started to bubble up out of all of them, if you stripped away the trade or the occupation that it was a certain series of fundamental principles that exist everywhere on the planet, in every trade and occupation, no matter what time and history it happened. And it was called the way of craftsmanship. And there are fundamental principles that permeate every one of them. And if you understand them, they're very simple and straightforward. You can apply it to everything you do. And so what I did in that particular book, it was about 7 or 8 years after I did the first one, is I realized this is the fundamental thing that we need to learn, because this is the philosophical and or process structure upon which all of our work must sit. And so the way of craftsmanship is basically to show and have people understand that it's neutral, it's culturally neutral. When I say the way of craftsmanship, you don't know if I'm referring to a male or a female. You don't know if I'm referring to one culture or another. It is this beautifully neutral idea that all people can take up and use, and then look at it in 1,000 different ways, and see the same universal principles coming through all the time.
I mean, when I dug a little deeper, but when I first came across your work, I originally thought it was someone in a particular profession who perhaps isn't that engaged with it. So not perhaps doing quality work, and then using these principles to increase the quality of it, or treat it like it's a craft, if you like. Is there any quality aspect to what you do, applying those principles to their profession?
It's at the center.
Okay.
It is at the center. And the way of craftsmanship comes out of the professions. So you've just taken it right back into full circle into the profession. So looking at the way we learn our trades, occupations, and professions, and I just use the word craft to encompass all human work endeavor in that regard. All of them use a structure to teach what is the knowledge of the craft. All of them use practice and process to improve your execution, your capability in the craft or the trade. And all of them then have an end result that you're trying to achieve. Yes, some product or service or idea that you're putting before not only yourself, but others. And quality or excellence of execution is at the center of craftsmanship, no matter what it is that you do. So it basically says, well, therefore, if that is a universal principle of all of our work in all of the different things we do as human beings throughout all of time, why can we not use that same universal principle that we all know, understand, and love and bring it back into, if I'm going to make a masterpiece of my own life as the ultimate work, why not do it with quality?
It makes me think of, that phrase, being stuck in a dead-end job. It makes me think that they're not using those 4 phases, because if they were, then perhaps it wouldn't be a dead-end job, because they'd be applying craftsmanship.
Well, that's a beautiful idea. And that is the idea that ultimately all your masters and mentors in craftsmanship, whatever it is, the medium, whether it's thought mediums or, tangible physical mediums, all your masters are always teaching you those principles that you just described. One of the ways that becomes a liberating idea for people stuck in a dead-end job is that while the job may be something they had to take, circumstances required that they create an income, and that they had to engage themselves in something that really wasn't their heart and soul, that by applying and being craftsmen or women as the fundamental view of themselves, what they would do, to your point, quite clearly, is to apply the pursuit of craftsmanship to the endeavor they are engaged in, so that even though it's not fulfilling their soul as their ultimate trade or craft, they are applying craftsmanship and getting and learning from it and bringing that back into making themselves. Yes?
Especially when it gets to 3rd and 4th phases.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we need that. So what it ends up, what you also end up learning in the study, and I've been doing this now 30 years, but what I've also ultimately boiled it down to in the study is that when you go through your life, you may engage in different work at different times in your life for all kinds of different reasons. I mean, your guest yesterday, who was a professional musician, or several days ago, the Stoicism, was a musician, did professional music, then moved on to having a music studio, and now has moved on to, another trade, if you will, as he moves through life. It didn't mean that his purpose has to be different, whereby the purpose is getting satisfaction and pride out of one's work, and that others can see and have access and use that work and also have a sense of satisfaction from it. That principle or purpose stays with you throughout your life, even though your work may change at different times throughout your life. That central purpose always stays. So this is something that when you get that embedded in you, really helps you get through, quote, the tough times, when you're having to do those works that's really not your spiritual calling, but is a required necessity for that time.
There was a quote that I really liked, or maybe a summary is a better way to describe it, and it was summarizing what you do, and it's how to practice life as a craft versus managing life purely by intuition, trial and error. To sort of make it clear for other people, what are some traits, or maybe making it clear for someone who is doing that, what might they see if they're doing those things?
Yeah. So let's start with the intuitive part of it, right? That means every day we get up and there's a bird flying into our window, or there's an automobile crossing our path that, we have to slam on our brakes, or we get a phone call from a family member that such and such a thing has happened. We are constantly throughout our days in our life being thrown things, right? And we either have a learned skill set that we are capable of applying to those situations and circumstances, or we don't. It's really quite that black and white, isn't it? Now, when we don't have a skill set and experience to apply to that given situation, we contextually don't know where to put it. We don't know which skills to bring to the forefront. We don't know which tools, which is critical in craftsmanship, which tools to use for the circumstance at hand. So we fly by the seat of our pants. And that happens to all of us. None of us can be omniscient, yes? I mean, we can't know everything and be skilled at everything. However, if one approaches life as a craft with the understanding that all things are based on the idea that there is a body of knowledge associated with them, such as a personal crisis or health care or something of these things that happen, that there is a process by which one can think it through, and these processes have been developed by others and can be learned, that there is the ability to practice being good and better at managing those things, then what starts to happen is this whole anxiety of, oh my God, I don't know what to do with my life. I don't know how to approach life. Life is nothing else but a constant ball of pressure and difficulty. And help, I don't know what to do. I'm in the water flailing. Life as a craft says, you can approach life as a learned craft. You can understand that all of these things have the ability to be learned and perfected over time. It's just a matter of which items are going to be on your workbench at any given moment in time to learn as you go through life. So ideally, that the basic idea is, if we could teach our children, which is how this all started for me, if we could teach our children in the apprenticeship phase that when they ask the question, Dad, what is life? And what's my purpose here? That rather than to be a doctor or a lawyer as the pat answer, the idea to say to them, the purpose of your life for every day, for the rest of your life, is to pursue and make a masterpiece of your life. That's why you're here. And now let us take you into the world of apprenticeship, and through the rest of your life, that you will know that you can approach life as a learned craft, not as an unknown terror.
Very good point.
And that has a tremendous effect on the way that someone's going to look at themselves and the way that they're going to manage the world around them.
Yeah, it's really powerful stuff. I really like it. Can you?
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that, because this is my brand new stepping out of into the fourth phase of my life. And like any craftsman, I don't know how others are going to receive this, but nonetheless, it's not so much that I seek their acceptance as much as you put your work on the table, you step back behind the curtain, and your work must speak for itself. And so when others do come, as you are, and you observe and consider the work and look at it and listen to it, you will either say, I appreciate that work, or not, right? Now, when you appreciate the work, it gives, in the center of craftsmanship, is the idea that there's a duality that says the craftsperson pursues the idea of excellence of execution with the idea that there are two parallel yin-yang goals, if you will. One is to improve personal pride in one's work, which builds a sense of self-satisfaction, self-esteem, which is critical because this self-esteem is our ultimate purpose. When we feel good about ourselves, we radiate to the world, right? And we can make ourselves feel very good by the quality of our work. But in craftsmanship traditions around the world, from Japan to Greece, you name it, they say the second critical thing that separates an artisan from a craftsman is that the craftsman puts the work out to the society at large for them to benefit as well. Both things. So that's what differentiates the idea of the way of craftsmanship. You do your work to build your own capability and skill, and you give that work to the world such that they may also use it for the same purpose. Now imagine if we lived in a world where everyone was building their own craftsmanship with the idea that their work would be given to the world so that they could benefit. We might live in a better place. And there are craftsmen and craftswomen all over the planet that think that way, and we know it. And when we come into contact with their work, I mean, goodness, you have work. There are things that you do, and I see what your customers write on your website. That's a sense of pride. It's quality work. You've given it to them, yeah? And they like it, and they're telling others about it. When we experience good craftsmanship from someone in whatever it is they do, we go tell everybody about it. We go tell them that restaurant that we ate at. We go tell them Thomas's company and his work and what he did. We love sharing good craftsmanship with one another.
And I would imagine that most people, if they're engaged, are thinking, what phase am I in right now? Have you got any thoughts about someone who perhaps isn't happy with where they are in the phase of their life and what they can do to transition from one phase to another, or if you should be focusing on that at all?
Well, that's an excellent question. And so I understand it in two parts as you've asked it, and I hope I will answer it correctly. The first part is what phase are they in their life? Phase, in my parlance, will be different than what we might call situation, right? So if you're asking me about phase in my parlance, that is dictated by the growth of your life. You're a tree. You're a tree, right? You're going to be about 80 years old as a tree. That's as far as we're going to go. So if there are 4 phases, and I would guess you are in the journey work phase. In this, you're somewhere between 25 and 45. That would be my guess, right? Now, now that you are in the journey work phase, if you were to look into life as a craft, as we've described it, and look at what is the journey work phase, which, by the way, is the endurance phase, and you can read and learn more about what that means. You're going through that. You've got the heat of the sun on your back all day long, and you're going through, and you're banging, and you need endurance, you need strength. At any given moment, and you can't change that. I mean, basically what we're saying is that phase of your life is that phase of your life. I mean, because it's built on a chronology. If you're inside a situation inside that phase, a daily situation, most of the times when somebody looks and they may be unhappy about the situation, in the way of craftsmanship, in the traditions of the craftsmanship of the world, what the masters usually teach the journeymen that they are working in that workshop is that when you're at a moment of an encounter whereby you're not pleased with where you are, that means you're frustrated with or something is not working correctly, they take you usually through a 3-step process. And this is something that people might be able to use from the way of craftsmanship. First, you will effectively try to identify what is it that has just blocked me. Now, is it the material that I'm working with, which could be oneself, that is not responding in the manner that I would like it to? And so I need to understand further what is the state or status of this material. And what that journeyman would do from the master's training, it was engage others to look at that material with them, yeah? Others who from the outside. The second would be, if it's not the material, is it the process that you are applying? So let's take a look at the process. So now you go through, what is it that you're doing? Yes. And the process is, this isn't working. Okay. So let's take a look at where's it breaking down. So in a factory or workshop, you're going to look at those process steps. And once again, you help others to come in and look and see how's that process working, right? Well, how do we untangle it? And the third thing they'll say is, well, if it's not the material, if the material's okay, and if the process you're doing is okay, what tools are you using at this moment for this situation and circumstance? Or aren't you using any tools at all, which might be part of the problem, right? Which tools are you using? Have you trained in those tools? Are you using the tools skillfully? And or meaning, are you applying too much pressure or not enough pressure? So those 3 components, right? The material, the process, and the tools, in every craft situation I have encountered, and I've read thousands of them, all seem to come down to this. So taking it back to the person who might be in a situation that they're not happy with in their life at the moment, no matter what phase you are in the way of craftsmanship, look at the material. Do you need to learn more? Look at the process. Do you need to learn or modify how you're doing? Or look at the tools or lack thereof. And when you look at those three things, you normally say, geez, it's one of those things. Now let me get help. Because in the way of craftsmanship, you always bring in your peers and your masters to help you work through to improve your skill and get to the next stage.
Or maybe a mentor, right?
Beg your pardon?
Or maybe a mentor.
Oh, absolutely. Well, this is where now a master crafts person might be acting in the role of a mentor. So getting back to the idea that mentorship is a phase in our lives, there is a phase called mentorship, but the act of mentoring is throughout our whole life. We mentor apprentices, we journey workers, in the traditions of journey work, are mentors to one another. Journey workers are mentors to apprentices. Masters are mentors to journey workers. So mentoring in that regard, teaching, but teaching in the way of teaching in a structured way, not just this off the top of your head, blah, blah, blah stuff that goes on all over the internet. That's not real. That's not authentic. It's not structured. It's not your trade. So there's a Chinese phrase that says, when you find a good teacher, wear out their doorstep. So choose your mentors carefully. Yes. Then wear out their doorstep.
That's a great point. I wanted to highlight something which I don't know whether I said it quite clearly enough, but it's just really resonated with me, which is the fulfillment in life, which is if you've got like a young person who's completely unfulfilled, it's probably because they're not an apprentice. And if you've got an older person who is unfulfilled or maybe unhappy with where they are, it's probably because they're not a mentor. And it just makes me think that message would be so valuable to someone in that position who's, I don't know, not enjoying themselves. It's just because they're not applying that phase. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, I would say that this is, I think you just, for your audience, you have just dug into the kernel of my life to the place where it caused me to think about exactly what you just said, which was one day, and there's an article in the Life Masterpiece Journal that describes this journey, and it started with the apprenticeship side of things, and which was my daughter. One day, she was about 6 years old, and this happens to, and you'll either observe this or you'll be a parent and have this happen to you, and then your child asks you something about life or whatever. And you just say some cute little thing from a Disney character or whatever the case may be. And the next thing you know, they're standing there looking at you with their hands on their hips going, Dad, I'm not a kid anymore. I'm not 6. Give me a real answer, right? And you suddenly realize, good Lord, that mind is awake and that mind is alive and that mind wants authenticity. They want true, yeah? So in the apprenticeship part of things, a great deal of the difficulty with the younger person is the fact that they are feeling extraordinarily powerful as young people. They are full of an enormous amount of energy. They're growing like in tremendous spurts, both mentally and physically. And if they do not have the right cues and environment around them to be entering the apprenticeship phase to structure and strengthen that growth, they're going to be in a very difficult place. And that means, so on the apprentice side, they're going to be without structure, they're going to be without form, and they are going to have nowhere to place that energy and that growth. And they're going to end up doing it intuitively or grabbing the first thing that comes along. And instead of a beautiful masterpiece beginning to be created, it's this patchwork collage of things from anywhere and everywhere, a popular song, a candy bar, whatever the case may be. And that starts becoming a difficult thing because in time, if they cross over into journey work and they start getting the idea that they may have to go back and they have to start taking away and doing some work, so to speak, on the thing that didn't get built quite right at the foundation and, work that out. So yes, there's a lot of frustration and there could be rework in the craftsman's way, you're going back and fixing something that wasn't built right at the beginning, yes? The same on the mentor side. Coming through many modern societies and modern messages, especially commercial messaging and the way they show youth and the way they show everything, there is this place where once you are at this age of retirement or you start moving and the children have moved out and whatnot, you start staring at this blank hole. You start staring at this very long day in which there's really nothing much before you. Society isn't really calling upon you. You don't really know what to do with your time or your effort. So you say, well, let's play golf or let's get a hobby or whatever. After having been a journeywoman or journeyman and a master earlier in your life, you're now going to this place where there's nothing for you to take you to the next level. And yes, to your point, you're now going to have people entering the mentorship phase of life purposeless. And they're going to feel empty and they're going to feel not appreciated, but they're going to feel that people tolerate them, must have them around or must, follow some sort of, well, I'll take care of granny or mom or dad or whatever because they're older, versus mom or dad having a significant purpose and continuing to contribute, such that when I write about the mentorship phase, one of the last things in one of the audio articles I said was, when the time comes and you're at your end of days and it's time to turn off the workshop lamp and close your workshop for the last time, may those who come behind you find on your workbench works yet as uncompleted, yes? Works that are in progress to be done. That is, that you to the last of your days were bringing forward your craftsmanship, not only for your own personal building, but to share with the world behind you. And it is those things that get picked up off that workbench that's called the heritage, that the next generation takes up and continues and carries forward. And this is the continuity. Craftsmanship becomes immortal because it passes from generation to generation to generation. And by having given to those who are coming behind you, you are effectively building, and they will stand on the shoulders of giants. Yeah. So this mentorship phase. If I would love for my age group, 65 and beyond, to hear this message. The only thing that I fear is that so many of them would have been programmed to think otherwise and programmed to think, oh, I'm tired, I'm old, I'm this, I'm that they won't realize they're in the most fantastic phase of their life.
The most knowledgeable phase as well.
Understood.
Can you tell me about the 5 elements?
So starting back with the original story with my daughter, one of the things that I basically thought about was, well, if my job is now to teach this young person or expose this young person to teachers, really is the way that this goes, what is it that she needs to learn? That was the concept. So as I started looking, so it said, well, what is if all of our trades and occupations and professions have curricula, what's the curricula for life? You'll go to the university, if you're going to study anatomy, you're going to study law, you're going to study woodworking. There is a very specific body of knowledge to learn. There are very specific levels of complexity of that knowledge that take place over, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's how trades and crafts work. So every time I looked at something and looked at a topic that we were thinking about, what I realized was that if the central work to be done is to build a masterpiece of your own life, and that we are the craftsperson of our own life progressively and pursuing craftsmanship throughout our whole life to work on it, where are all the topics? How can they be organized in a simplified curriculum that when you're interested in a particular topic, you can say, oh, it's in this category. So the 5 elements is the result of that thought process, which basically says that in the craft of life, like every craft, there is a distinct body of knowledge that covers any subtopic you can possibly think of. And there are 5 elements. Those are the 5 elements. And if you understand what they are, you can sit there at any time and say, well, what am I interested in? What's on my workbench right now? What is something I need to learn? And you can pick up and say, oh, it's this. Say, which of the 5 elements does that fall into? And over 30 years, I've not found once it failing, that I could take any topic or anything that anyone's interested in and put it into one of those 5 elements, which basically said, so if you understand structurally the 5 elements, life, therefore, does not have to be this random, disassociated, unconnected collection of collage things that you're just putting like Post-it notes all over your body. You could say, rather, there is an organizing structure. And if I understand it, then life doesn't have to come at me as a big scary thing. It can come at me as, okay, I get it. Let me calm down for a moment and say, we're moving into this element over here. Now let me find the right teachers for that particular topic and that element to take me through the level of skill that I need or want to achieve in that particular topic or that category. And that's what it was. It becomes almost like going into a bookstore, or something, and saying, here are the categories of, things, right? Without them, everything is just a mess all over the bookstore and you don't know where to find anything.
Interesting. So where does this education come from? What did you do, or what did you study in order to come to these conclusions?
Well, I wouldn't say that it was perhaps it was something that I might have formally studied when I was back at university, at college. Among other things, I went to the oldest communication arts and sciences college here in America. And in that college, they, like every place else, had structures for, here's the content we're going to learn. And what I mean by communications, I'm talking about everything from communication theory to television and radio to speech pathology and audiology. I mean, literally everything having to do with communication. Now, one of the things that was there that may have been an influence on me thinking about this concept structurally was the way in which cultures communicate with one another and cross-cultural communication. And through that, you start learning about their worldviews of the culture, and in particular, usually the central, cosmology or religion at the center of that culture, and how it is a structural foundation for explaining why you're here, what you're doing, so forth and so on. So I think that possibly exposure to those learnings during my apprenticeship phase of my life may have helped to create the organizational structure or ideas of organization or systems in my mind that my mind was forcing me to say, you have to keep boiling this down and not just having everything be random, that when your daughter asks you a question, it's just like, oh God, what's that about? And you're reaching for something like Mickey Mouse or whatever, but you can say, well, what you're asking about is something that has to do with the internal human being, or what you're asking about is something physical that has to do with the external human being, or what you're asking about is something that has to do with family heritage, yeah? And so at the end of the day, it was that work process, as I explained in the article that I wrote about this. My work has taken me all over the world for many years, and I used to have to endure excruciatingly long airplane flights. And that gave me a tremendous amount of time to sit there and just, I got 14 hours between here and Tokyo. What am I going to do? So, as I started working it out that way. So I think it's a combination of an unconscious early apprenticeship in the idea of structures and systems, and the conscious realization of, oh my God, I'm a parent now. What do I do? So,
you can only watch so many movies on a plane. You got to reflect for a bit, right?
I found that that's all I did on a plane. I would stare out the window at clouds for endless hours, and people would say, this chap is just, really, how can you do that? And I would say, it's quite amazing, actually. But anyway, nonetheless, so that's what I would be thinking. So, yeah, it really had to do with and many parents are there, have been there, will be there or caregivers, however you want to call that, you get this pressure on yourself that says, I am responsible for this human being that's coming up. In fact, and not only just that responsibility, but I think the emotional pressure of love, this thing that weighs down on you and just fills you, gets you to a place where if you have the time and if you have, and a lot of people don't, you do everything you possibly can to make that little human being grow to the point where then you start passing them off to their apprenticeship phase to progressively start taking over responsibility for crafting their own life. Yeah. So that 12 years that you've got, or that 14 years that you've got as they're growing from childhood to, getting to the place of crossover to apprenticeship, it ain't much. It just isn't at the end of the day. And the clock starts ticking. So you start saying, what can I do? What shall I do? Yeah. And that's what happens.
Have you gotten any feedback from your children about how they've used it or how they thought of it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because I often thought, well, geez, if people listen to me saying this, they're probably going to go, oh my God, how could I have ever been a child under that guy? Because he's probably going to
I wasn't thinking that at all.
No. I've often thought about this myself before, thinking, shall I even tell anybody about this? Because they're going to think, oh, you probably put a book in front of them and made them march in line and all that. No. So the answer to this is I have left my daughter, who is now a mom herself, has a little 2-year-old. I left her to take up her learning as she progressively, on her own, as she progressively entered her apprenticeship from around age 12 or 14 and going through her college university years to age 24. During that time, she progressively is taking up responsibility for being the craftswoman of her own life. Yeah. And what a mentor master has to do is to absolutely stand back and allow that craftsperson who has their own life to craft to do so on their own. Otherwise, that life becomes your craft work, not theirs. And so this is a really, careful balance. I think that because you always want to get in there and say, oh, no, but you can do it like this. Well, wait a minute. So I think the answer is that my daughter actually comes and reads my work. She, on her own, looks at it. Sometimes she'll clap for it, those kinds of things, which absolutely fills me. That's all I need. I get, 2,000 claps on an article or something like this. And if I see that she gave just one, that's more than I could, that's it. I'm good for the whole day. Right?
That's what it's for. Yeah.
Yeah. So, she, in her own way, when she brings it up, and she does, and when we talk about it, and we do, it's always positive. That's the good news. It's never been, oh, I have to do this because my old man did it, or, whatever kind of thing. And so the good news to your question, which is a lovely question, thank you, was that I believe it's worked out okay. That she is the craftswoman of her own life, and that and as I leave this world, who knows, as she gets a little bit older, as her baby now starts getting to that 6-year-old place where her baby turns and says, Mom, what's life all about? I think that light bulb's going to come on really strong. Go, wait a minute, been to this movie before.
Disney movie this time, right?
Yeah. So, to be written, let's see, but so far so good.
Good. Do you have any goals for your mentoring phase?
I do. Another lovely question, Thomas. So the goal as written in Life as a Craft has a very distinct end result, which is kind of like that presidential library that I referred to earlier, yeah? Which is during this next 20 years, what I have to do is determine which vehicles I will use to record the knowledge and the work and put it out for ease of access to my own family, which is, as I said, my daughter is already, in there, and looking and reading things in the most recent version called Life Masterpiece Journal. And then can that go outward to a larger community, vis-a-vis podcasts, vis-a-vis, these things. So that is the ultimate goal. Is to decide which items to present such that they can be observed and looked at and understood, and which to leave out, which is as critically important as that which you choose to leave in. Yeah. So that is the goal for the next 20 years. I'm going to work at it. It's not an easy task making a masterpiece.
No, I don't suppose it is, but I'll be intrigued to see how you get on. I think it's been a really valuable or meaningful conversation. Have you got anything that you want to add as a close?
So I would say to your audience, to you, thank you so much for your insightful and very, very calm, insightful questions, which I spoke quite a bit on. But I would say that first and foremost, understand that life can be practiced as a craft. That's the first thing that I would leave to your audience. Secondly, that in practicing it as a craft, it means that you observe, you acquire skills, and you practice those skills over time and improve. And that the most important part of it is that you are the craftsperson of your life. And that for all the days of your life, your ultimate goal is to make a masterpiece of your life and to set that on a hill and light the way for others.
It's a great conclusion. I love it. Where's the best place for people to find you?
I would say a good start, mylifemasterpiece.com. Will take them to the Life Masterpiece Journal, which sits on Medium, which is a platform I don't know if a lot of people know about, but it's a platform where you can publish content. And so I've set up my journal because the journal is one of the artifacts that I'm now using to put the content into. I think you can read 5 articles or something like that for free. So when you go there, enjoy yourself. And if you like it, I think it's a few dollars a month to be a member. I think it's a great place to start. Secondly, I would admonish them to look at this podcast, because I don't do a lot of these where I get to explain what's behind. The idea is I put the work out there and the work must speak for itself, or that's it. I'm not there to sell anything. It's look at the work and take it for what it is. I would admonish them, though, to look at your podcasts to learn and understand, because I think that's a very important addition to the work itself. Conversation with craftsmen.
Well, thank you very much for being a great guest. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Lovely.
I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you so much. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.